So just quickly, I'm just going to be talking about some general principles about pastures and recovering after flooding, tolerance of grasses to flooding, and then we'll go through some management options. Like I said, these aren't rocket science, these are all pretty straightforward, fairly simple sort of things, and hopefully it's just going to be reinforcing what you're already doing anyway. So generally pastures are quite resilient. They definitely will recover over time, but what you do in the short term and medium term will definitely dictate how long, or the actual speed of recovery, I suppose, over the next few months and years. So basically, obviously, the speed of recovery will depend on how much water was over the actual pastures and so forth, and what sort of damage was caused from that, and therefore that subsequent recovery of those plants, but also the actual speed of regrowth after the actual waters have moved off, and also in particular how fast those little seedlings will come through the pastures too. So the speed of recovery will depend on a few of those things there, but also will depend on how the pasture is managed, particularly from here on in. Obviously pastures will recover much more quickly when it's hot and warm and so forth, and wet, so particularly in summer. And pastures which are in good condition before the flooding or the big event will definitely recover quicker than those that have been flogged quite hard or have been decimated for some other reasons prior to. And that's primarily due to having a larger seed bank in the soil, so the more seed in the ground, the more recovery, all those seedlings will come through much quicker and faster and thicker. Possibly those pastures in good condition have had less flooding or are taller, therefore they mightn't have been underwater for as long. And they also should have more energy in their root systems and their crown systems and so forth, so they will recover quicker because they are healthier anyway to actually start with. And I think it's been pretty evident from my travelling around the last few weeks anyway, that where pastures have a good body of feed beforehand, are definitely recovering much quicker than those that are this high and sort of really struggling beforehand. So I suppose we've also had issues prior to the actual rainfall event that most pastures were quite dry. Obviously had a pretty hot dry spell beforehand, and many pastures have been grazed quite heavily. That's just what happened, unfortunately. But the ones that have been are in good condition right from the start are definitely going to be recovering much quicker. So tolerance of grasses to flooding and also silt and so forth across them. There is differences in species with their tolerance to flooding. Many of you will know that buffalo grass will only survive a couple of days being underwater and so forth. I think Gatton panics or green panics are fairly similar. So whereas the bambatses or the florin blue grasses, those grasses which can tolerate plenty of water and those heavier soil types will definitely recover much quicker and will definitely tolerate a lot more water over them. Silt's obviously a problem, and once the actual waters recede and the actual silt sort of remains, that's going to be a problem for all grass species really. It's going to sort of starve the plant for light and oxygen and so forth, and that's just going to be an issue that we'll just have to manage and deal with. Hopefully if there's been some rainfall afterwards, that might wash the actual silt off, but as you know there hasn't been much of that since the last event anyway, unfortunately. So with that silt deposition and so forth, and the slowing down of the actual grasses which are there, the soil seed bank is going to be pretty critical for seedlings to come back through and hopefully thicken the pasture back up again. Okay, so that's just some quick background sort of information. So what about the management options from here on in, so past or post the event? So the first one is about pasture spelling, and this might seem fairly simple and intuitive, and obviously it basically is, but we want to basically try and allow those grasses and pasture plants to regrow as fast as possible, for those seedlings to come through as quickly as possible as well if they are going to come through. And we want them to recover and regrow some leaves as fast as possible, obviously. So we need to, quite basically sort of match the stocking rate to the carrying capacity, so which again is quite simple and quite easy to understand. But it's fairly important, particularly if you're going to have a good healthy grass pasture going forward. We need to basically look at stocking rates, we need to look at how the actual grazing management is occurring, whether it's a continuously graze situation or going to be rotationally grazed and so forth. Need to match stocking rate to carrying capacity, and there's numerous ways of doing that, either selling cattle or gisting them or moving them into other paddocks. Maybe sort of feeding some cattle as well, or feeding in certain areas to try and rest those other areas. But in many cases, if the fences have been washed away anyway, you're going to have to sort of do some spelling because you can't have cattle there in the first place. So those sorts of things have to be thought about, and obviously it's pretty straightforward too. If done quickly and correctly, we can basically have a minimal impact on the stock remaining, and they will hopefully move forward with their performance, and also the pastures will definitely recover quicker if we can try and match the stocking rate or spell some country and so forth and get those cattle off. Past experience has shown with other floods in previous years that high density grazing does seem to help break up silt layers and the crusting of the soil, and that apparently can and does improve the germination of the seedlings or the seed in the ground to come through. So I think having some sort of rotational effect will definitely help. It might also help break up the actual silt on the plants as well with the cattle moving through and so forth like that. But and resting pastures is pretty critical. So obviously if you can allow those grasses to set some fresh seed and put that seed back in the ground, while some species do have some dormancy with that seed, so it won't germinate for another 6 or 12 months, other grass species do have much shorter sort of germination periods. So, but the critical thing is to, particularly if the pastures haven't really set seed in the previous summer or the summer beforehand, so the actual seed bank is low or old, having some fresh seed on the ground will definitely be advantageous to try and get there. So again, sort of managing the grazing pressure to do that's going to be critical. Controlling weeds, I think weeds was mentioned up here, but weeds coming in, most obviously that many weed seeds going to be transported through the water and so forth and might end up in your pasture. Those weeds, particularly if you're going to have very fast growing broadleaf weeds, they will definitely upset or slow down the recovery process from the existing plants, will definitely upset the actual germination and establishment of those young seedlings. So weed pressure is going to be a major issue and one thing to actually look out for. Selective herbicides, particularly for broadleaf weeds, is going to be a good option to actually think about as to what species obviously or what weeds are going to be there and so forth, and therefore what herbicides are going to be the main ones to use or the options to use, but definitely sort of go through your pastures, look for any sort of weeds and particularly think about controlling if there are many there. So in some cases we have noticed in the past where producers have actually put a broadacre spray of whatever across the pasture to remove, say for instance, Parthenium and further west sort of type country. That can be more effective than actually reseeding the pasture in itself. So herbicides can be a very valuable tool in the toolbox for going forward. What about reseeding the pasture? So many people have in the past raced out there and flown on some seed and so forth onto some wet soil or receding sort of floodwaters, and the results have been extremely mixed, and invariably they've been complete failures or very close to failures. And many producers have said, I wouldn't do that again because it's cost me so much money and I've had no real response or no germination from those seeds applied. So I suppose the actual key message here is don't race out and apply more seed, particularly go and look through your pasture and see what's happening, see what survival has occurred, what seedlings are coming through, and that might take 2 or 3 weeks to actually sort of look through and see what actually is happening first up. Reseeding can be very expensive. I mean, as we know, buffalo grass or other sort of grass pasture seeds are fairly expensive to go and buy, and you'll be putting on 2 or 3 kilos a hectare. I mean, that could be $20, $30, $40, $50 a hectare for seed alone. So it can be quite expensive, and particularly if there's already enough seed in the ground for some seedlings to come through. So, as I mentioned, flooded soils can be fairly poor seed beds for establishing a pasture, and that's due to the decaying debris with the sort of either stuff that's come through being transported there or the silt and so forth. Their soils can be crusted over, and that's not going to be very good for seed soil contact to actually ply out some seed. So again, maybe some cattle intervention to create some sort of roughage or some sort of disturbance on the surface of the ground to create some sort of tilth might be a good thing to get some seed soil contact, and then go from there. Again, actually, before I go any further, in the actual handouts, basically, there's 4 or 5 pages of this information. So I'm just basically sort of summarising what's in your handouts, pretty much. If there's less than one grass plant per 5 square metres, there's a rule of thumb. And no seedlings are emerging, so that's why we say go out there, go and check what's happening first before you go and reseed. Then reseeding could be the best option. So one plant in 5 square metres is not many plants, obviously, but if that plant can set some seed, put some fresh seed on the ground, that's going to be a good thing, and that's going to hopefully speed up that recovery much quicker. If you do want to reseed because there's nothing coming back, there's no seedlings at all, everything looks pretty well dead, consider putting a flood-tolerant grass species in your mix, such as a bambatsi or a florin bluegrass. Florin bluegrass is a very good grass, very productive grass, but it's probably the most expensive grass to buy though. It wouldn't be the most, but it's up there anyways. But it's a very good grass. Bambatsi has been around for some time, and most of you would know what bambatsi's like. I'm saying here avoid putting any sort of silk sorghum or other forage in with that mix, and that's just because those forages definitely rob moisture and nutrients from the perennial pasture species which you're putting in there, and that will definitely slow pasture recovery if the rainfall doesn't occur regularly after the event or after application. Consider putting in a perennial legume suitable for your soil type. Most critical to add some more nitrogen to our pastures to improve the grass growth. Ensure the seed is very high quality, so make sure you have a germination test when you go out and buy your seed. And make sure it obviously has good vigour as well. So definitely make sure all those sort of seed testing has been done on it. And sowing options, there are numerous different options. Obviously you can broadcast the seed out onto the pasture as such. You can either direct drill it into it as well, or do some sort of cultivation to create some sort of tilth with your soil there. So numerous options, and it might depend on what sort of gear you have available to you on your own place or can have access to. So I think ideally if you're going to broadcast more seed or legumes onto an existing pasture, if the pasture is pretty thick and growing quite well anyway, that's going to compete very heavily with your little seedlings coming through. So think about how that might affect the recovery process or the establishment process. So maybe in that case, if you do want to put some legumes in particularly to actually maybe spray out what's there, which might sound a bit sort of silly, but to actually control the grass, what's there now, to provide the opportunity for those little legumes to come through later on. If there's no grass there at all, obviously putting some grass out there is going to be the best option. So that's about reseeding the pasture. This is the fourth slide here about management options. So what about putting in a forage crop as such? So what about having a dedicated area, either part of a paddock which is under existing pasture anyway, or a dedicated pasture or a forage paddock, and using that as some reliable feed. So, and I think a forage crop of some sort is a very good tool, particularly if there's going to be, there should be plenty of moisture in the ground to actually sow a forage crop. So, and that will basically allow the spelling of your existing pastures quite happily, which will therefore definitely speed up the recovery process of those perennial existing pastures, provide some good short-term feed as well. So, and that can be done either, again as I mentioned, in a dedicated forage paddock somewhere or other, or you could basically plant part of your existing pasture which hasn't recovered too well or isn't recovering too well to a forage. Just that I don't recommend or don't suggest to put a forage across the whole paddock, particularly if it's coming away quite happily, such as with silk sorghum and so forth. So summer options include a forage sorghum obviously, and forage, as you will know, produces plenty of bulk feed. Lab cowpea and so forth are very high quality feeds, provide good sort of protein to your cattle. Millets are obviously an option as well. But looking forward, coming into the winter, you might think, well, it's a bit late now for those summer options, which I think in many cases it might be, although there are many producers out there currently who are putting in forage sorghum and lab as we speak. But this part of the world where it's probably a bit cooler, winters might come a bit earlier than further north and west. Maybe thinking about a winter crop option like an oats, maybe sort of direct drilling some oats into some pasture could work, or some forage wheat and barley might work quite happily as well. And I have a question mark on medics. Medics are quite useful for a winter forage, obviously high quality forage, but they need follow-up rainfall or good winter rainfall to maximise their potential and their growth, and to set seed for previous or next years. So they could be an option too. Again, direct drilling into your pasture or sowing into your dedicated forage paddock, or sowing after some cultivation or cultivations as required. So this is my last slide about the key messages. So basically, pastures in good condition will obviously recover much quicker than those in poor condition before the event. Adjust stocking rate. I know that's pretty intuitive, but it's very important to adjust stocking rate and assess the feed availability and stock appropriately, and obviously reassess your grazing management. You might want to rotate cattle around a bit earlier or quicker to provide some sort of tilth on the surface of the ground and that sort of thing, or try and upset or try and get rid of or reduce the actual silt on the plants themselves. Control the weeds if they are in high numbers. Wait 2 or 3 weeks to determine if reseeding is needed. Healthy pastures that have recently set seed are unlikely to need reseeding again. Avoid the silk or forages in the pasture mix. Avoid flying it on into reseeding waters. And a dedicated forage crop can be quite useful. So those are pretty much the key messages that I wanted to get across for a pasture wise. So that's pretty much it.